Good morning. I'm going to call the meeting for Commerce is in order. Michelle, will you please call the roll?
Senator Cierpiot.
Here.
Henderson.
Here.
Bernsketter. Carter. Fitzwater. Gregory. May. McCreary. Mosley.
We have a quorum, so we will begin. Before I start today, I want to, again, get some information out. Today we'll be hearing Senate Bill 6, which is my bill, so the Vice Chairman will handle the committee. My plan is Thursday, we will have an exec session on Senate Bills 4, 5, and 6, and vote them out, I hope. And the next week, we will hear Senate Bill 186. And this is kind of important, and this is on me, so I want you to be aware of this. 186, the way we drafted it, was not complete. But if you'll, refiled the bill as 618 happens to have the same numbers. So if you look online at Senate Bill 618, it has the information that Senate Bill 186 will be sub to. So I want to make sure everybody's clear of that so they can prepare for the meeting next week. So if you remember that, 618 is what 186 was supposed to be. We'll have that hearing next week on 186, and then I will sub 816 for that bill. I hope that's not too confusing, and I apologize for that. I also want to encourage everybody today, if you have a witness form, please leave it up there, or if you did it online, that's fine. And I also want to reiterate, last week we talked about if you say numbers in this committee, I would appreciate it. So whether it's pro or con, if you'll give Michelle that information after the fact so she can spread it with the committee. Last week we heard some numbers. I never got anything back verifying or being able to prove those numbers out. So please do that if you provide numbers to the committee. I just want to give it so the committee members can see where these numbers are coming from, so it helps them make decisions on this stuff. With that, I will turn it over to Senator Henderson, and we'll start.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a question about the executive committee on Thursday. When you say we're going to vote out Senate bills 4, 5, and 6, are they going to be rolled together, or are they going to be standalone bills?
They're going to be standalone. The committee on the floor, I plan on rolling them together.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Senator Cierpiot, when you're ready, if you would, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I appreciate that. For the record, I'm Mike Cierpiot from the 8th Senate District in Jackson County. Similar to last week, the concepts in Senate Bill 6 have been heard in this committee before. Section 393.401 deals with electric reliability for Missouri. Due to the closure of coal plants and Missouri investing in so much renewable power, there's a serious threat that moving forward, Missouri will not be able to meet the demand for reliable electricity. This bill would ensure that prior to the closure of an existing power plant, the electric utility must replace it with equal or greater amount of reliable generation and assure the replacement generation is fully constructed and in operation within 120 days of closing the existing plant. Section 393.1030 deals with renewable energy standard. When voters passed the renewable energy standard in 2008, large commercial and industrial customers were not voluntarily buying renewables to meet their company's clean energy goals. Today is a vastly different story where hundreds of companies ranging from banks to large manufacturers and infrastructure companies have clean and renewable energy goals. They voluntarily buy large amounts of renewable energy to meet those goals. The problem lies if a state has a renewable energy standard that doesn't allow for utilities or the state to factor in the company's voluntary renewable purchases to support their own operations. It leads to a situation where the utilities are over-purchasing renewables for the RES, and which means customers are paying more than they need to pay to the utility to comply with the renewable energy standards. This is a technical change to the RES, the Renewable Energy Standard, that allows the state to factor in these voluntary large-scale renewable energy purchases made by commercial and industrial customers. So the utility doesn't have to purchase renewables to cover the customer's load twice with renewables. An additional benefit for average customers is the fact that the additional load requirements for those customers won't increase the renewable energy requirements that are part of the Renewable Energy Standard, saving customers millions of dollars. And finally, Section 393-1400 was introduced last year in response to the pressing need for reliable baseload power. Baseload generation is essential to ensure a stable energy supply amidst the shifting landscape and economic development. With the burgeoning projects like the manufacturing facilities and data centers on the horizon, the necessity for continuous 24/7 power generation is paramount. Recently, MISO and FERC highlighted in their assessment a projected 1,300 megawatts shortfall beginning next summer, which continues to grow throughout the 10-year assessment period as coal, nuclear, and natural gas generation retire faster than replacement resources are connected. This section builds on the plant in-service accounting, the PISA formula mechanism established by the legislature and passed in 2018. The updated language allows PISA to be applied to natural gas plants built in response to generation needs previously discussed. This proposal was considered and passed by this committee last year. It allows PISA to rules from 85 to 90% of the investment. You will notice on page 16 language that amends the original PISA bill, ensuring utilities are not required to spend additional funds on distribution investments. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I think there's several people behind me that will come up with more detail.
Questions from the committee? Senator McCreary.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, yesterday in my state Senate district in Sunset Hills in South St. Louis County, there was a Public Service Commission hearing open for the public to testify, and when I saw pictures of that online, there was no parking outside. The room was filled to the brim with people who are just fed up with paying more for everyday things, including utilities. So right now, in front of the Public Service Commission, Ameren, which serves my constituents, is asking for a 10 to 15% rate increase. Can you walk through for us, because I think we're here to represent our constituents, why you think this is something that should be added to the monopoly's ability to impact rates? Like, what is in it for our constituents to justify the 10 to 15% rate increase that they're asking for right now? Because if this additional PISA were to pass, I see it leading to increased rates for our constituents.
I'd be happy to talk on that. I'm not convinced that PISA increases rates automatically. I think it's a process. As far as the rate increase, I have the details on that, but I know there's no PSC for eggs or milk or anything else, and everything has been going up recently. And so any company, even monopolies, I'm sure have upward pressure just on the cost of labor, the cost of everything they're doing. And so
I get that, but it's outpacing inflation, and our constituents that are on fixed incomes or people that just have jobs, that their wages are not keeping up with inflation. So
I agree but that's across the board for everything, right?
Yeah.
And the numbers I've seen show the investor-owned utilities that they're not out of line with the rates that they've increased in the last 5 or 10 years since PISA has been around. And I think that's part of the formula that we really need to keep in mind, Senator. But once it has concerned me and several people in the Senate that I've talked to is just our ability to keep up with the load. I'm concerned that in the next few years, ruling brownouts or some other things between us and Illinois and some other states. And the reason I think that having the gas turbines added to the old formula makes it more likely, because quite honestly, I don't know that anybody's going to build a coal-fired plant anymore. I just don't think that allows it. But gas-fired plants they're reliable, they're dispatchable, they're online, and they're ready to go, where some of this other stuff is not. And that's why I think it's important to add gas-fired plants to the existing rules, is to make it less burdensome for them to deploy usually 400, 500, 600 megawatt gas turbines.
And I hear what you're saying, and I was just a lowly House member in 2018, and gas was excluded intentionally from PISA back then. And if I remember right, the monopolies marketed PISA to us as grid modernization, but the reality is it impacted more than grid modernization, quite honestly. So I'm fortunate that I still have my notes from 2018 when PISA was being debated and then ultimately passed here. There was a memo from the PSC staff in April 2018 that clearly states that there would be a rate increase. And it runs different scenarios where if it just included grid modernization or if it included grid modernization and other upgrades, basically. So I've got this right here. I'm happy to submit it to Michelle so everybody can
That'd be
see
fine.
it.
We'd be happy to do that.
You know, I'm struggling to figure this out as well.
I appreciate that. And like I said, the last year or so, I have really taken an interest in the reliability of our grid. And I know people get upset about rate increases, but that's, like I said, part of that is the time we're living. Inflation is going against everything. But I really worry about if we have rolling brownouts. If you think you hear from constituents today, we will hear from constituents if that starts happening. And I just want to make sure that in Missouri, we don't have that issue.
I get that, but part of the deal with a monopoly is they're supposed to be taking care of their infrastructure and their grid and everything that they own and manage. It's this agreement that they have with Missourians, our constituents, that they're going to provide safe, adequate, reliable service at just and reasonable prices. And so if there are rolling brownouts, whose fault is that? I think it's the investor-owned utility's fault if there's a rolling brownout.
Well, I think part of the issue could be put on the EPA and DC too. I mean, the way they're making them close plants. Plus, we're in a growth environment which we haven't had since AC probably was introduced back in the '60s, with the renewed demand that they're going to have to build out. And that's another issue because as we go to more and more renewables, the old way of building a power plant right next to a city, eminent domain is going to come back into play because they're going to have these lines coming in from Oklahoma and Texas bringing in solar and wind. And so that whole thing in the next 10 years is going to be looked at because there's a lot of changes that are going to happen historically to what we've had for grid for the last 75 years.
And I hope Missouri experienced a period of growth. That would be marvelous for all of us. Just one other thing. So I remember listening to this debate in 2018, and part of the deal to get this bill out of the Senate was there was an agreement on 85%, so that the entire burden wasn't on our constituents. So moving it to 90 makes me uncomfortable. It was my predecessor, Senator Shoup, who negotiated that, and so I'm uncomfortable with, putting even more of a burden onto our constituents. But then the other thing that I'm hoping I can work with you on is this idea that the sunsets are moving. So in my notes from 2018, we talked about PISA sunsetting so that we could pause and let the experts do an analysis of PISA on our constituents. And it's not just our residential folks, it's the businesses as well, to see how it actually impacted rates. And so by moving the sunsets further down the road, my concern is that we're just accepting the fact that this is going to happen and that there's not a time to pause and do an analysis to see if it's what's best for our constituents.
Okay.
So,
We'll talk about that.
okay, very good, thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Okay, what we're going to do is we'll bring up people for and against, and we'll go back and forth at this point. What I would ask you, make sure you have your form with you. And second, I would ask that when testimony becomes redundant, please just kind of let's move on at that point because I think we have quite a few people. How many people plan to testify on this bill? So if we get redundant testimony, please let's move on so we can move on with the committee. So anybody testifying in support?
Senator, before
Yes.
they come up, can I say one more thing? I forgot,
Yes.
I left off one chapter of the bill, and I
Yeah,
apologize for that.
One moment, sir.
It's, sorry, Warren.
Go
It's
ahead.
section 393-1700. This is just a fix to the securitization bill that we passed in 2021. It allows the PSC to hire a bond person to help them sort through that. That's really the gist of what they're doing. So I'll let it go at that. Thank you, Senator.
Any other questions? Seeing none. First person to testify in support, please turn your form in and begin when you're ready.
Hi.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rob Dixon. I'm the Senior Director of Economic Development for Ameren, Missouri. And as some of you know, I served previously before coming to Ameren as the Director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development under Governor Parson. In the few short years since I left state government, the entire landscape around energy and economic development and their relationship together have truly changed exponentially, and you heard some of that from the Senator. I believe we're truly in the midst of an industrial revolution and energy and technology in particular are at the center of that. Today, there's really nothing more fundamental than attracting economic development, attracting new jobs and investment to our state, than ensuring that we can provide reliable and affordable energy in the time period that's demanded by businesses large and small today. It really has not always been the case to the degree it is today, but it certainly is now. So for some brief perspective on how quickly and significantly this has changed, in 2019, the average load requested by an economic development prospect that was looking at somewhere in our service territory was just over 3 megawatts. Today, that same average economic development prospect is looking for over 180 megawatts. That's an increase of nearly 6,000% in 5 years of increased expected economic development load. This surge is truly driven by changes in economic activity stemming from changes in manufacturing, new technology, and certainly from the tech industry in particular. Manufacturers are getting larger, and they're increasingly needing larger and more intensive capital investment equipment, and that drives their energy needs. The tech sector is also rapidly expanding to build out data centers to power the growing need for more computing to support literally everything in our daily lives, and that's not just as individuals, but in businesses large and small. There are, as you know, rapidly expanding AI data centers to meet the growing demand for this new technology, and these facilities have massive power needs in the hundreds of megawatts and beyond. I think today data centers could even be viewed as critical infrastructure in their own right, and in many cases this is becoming a national security interest that the U.S. depends on outpacing the technology development happening in foreign countries, and we've actually seen news about that even this week. But closer to home in Missouri, large manufacturers' data centers are going to bring tremendous economic development benefits. They bring thousands of permanent and construction jobs. They drive additional tax revenue to our communities without having tax increases, which is really the purpose of economic development. None of this finally is possible, though, without the ability to quickly and affordably build new generation resources to serve this increase in demand. It's certainly one of the most important issues facing our energy sector and facing our state in terms of economic development. If we have the energy resources to attract this economic development, Missouri will win, and if we're not able to do so, our state and our communities will miss out on this opportunity. I will turn it over to my colleague from Ameren, and I think we'll take questions at your convenience.
Thank you, Rob. Hey, Chairman and committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 6. My name is Warren Wood. I'm an engineer, and I'm Ameren, Missouri's Legislative and Regulatory Vice President. My testimony is focused on two provisions in the bill. First, what I'll refer to as the watt-for-watt section on page 1, and then the Power, Predictability, and Reliability Act, also called PISA, starting on page 13. Regarding watt-for-watt, this is similar to legislation considered by the General Assembly last session. Simply put, this section provides policy to help ensure Missouri has sufficient electric generating capacity in the future. We support the policy. I understand Mr. Eminger with Energy Policy Network will provide more testimony on this, so I won't steal his thunder. Regarding the Power, Predictability, and Reliability Act, this is similar to legislation passed by the General Assembly back in 2018. We all remember the debates at length, and it was in support of grid modernization at the time. The passage of this legislation has enabled hundreds of millions of dollars of incremental annual investment in grid modernization. We're seeing significant improvements in reliability and resiliency as a result of those ongoing investments. I won't repeat the important issues addressed by Mr. Dixon's testimony. He lays out the clear energy and economic development opportunities and challenges now in front of us. The most important change of this legislation versus previously passed is that it expands qualifying energy infrastructure to include natural gas electric generating plants, to accelerate these plants being built and being operational. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, which Ameren, Missouri is part of, it's basically a multi-state transmission operator, has forecasts a 4,700 megawatt shortfall in generating capacity by 2028 if currently planned generation retirements occur and new resources are added under the current plan. This is already a difficult challenge to overcome since that's only 3 years away. New large customers with high energy demands only make this more of a challenge because many of them are currently not reflected in the demand forecast. To win these enormous economic development opportunities, Missouri needs several thousand megawatts of additional generating capacity. We are laser focused as a company on meeting this need. One last thing I want to discuss about this legislation. When the initial version of this legislation implementing PISA passed in 2018, some argued that electric rates would increase dramatically. Since this legislation passed, Ameren, Missouri has rate case decisions from the Missouri Public Service Commission have taken our rates down twice and up twice. We are currently in front of the Commission with a third increase request. Some facts on our electric rates. When PISA legislation passed, our electric rates were 17 and 19% below Midwest and national averages, and I will provide all this information to Michelle after the hearing, okay? Now, about 7 years later, our electric rates are 27 and 29% below Midwest and national averages. If our current rate request was fully granted by the Missouri Public Service Commission, which doesn't typically happen, our rates would still be 15% below Midwest and national averages. So you see there's been a dip from where we were below, and we're just about getting back to the same comparison, national Midwest averages 7 years later. So over the last 7 years, since this legislation passed, our rates have gone up an average of 1.3% per year, while Midwest and national rates have increased faster. Since the passage of this legislation, our rates have continued to be well below inflation. The escalation of rates in our current rate case, over 15%, is being observed in other nearby states and has more to do with material and labor shortages and rapidly increasing domestic and international requirements for electric infrastructure, and more to do with that than demand of passage of this legislation. And I'll provide the other surrounding states and the kind of averages we're seeing in those states. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this bill, and I welcome any questions you may have.
I've got one question. You're in the middle of a rate case, I think, right now. Is that correct, for an increase?
Yes, we just finished all the public hearings. I was at the public hearing in Sunset Hills yesterday.
So what do you see leading to flattening or lowering of rates long term?
Well, that's a really good question, and you can imagine it's on a lot of people's minds because you can't keep coming in for those kind of rate increases sustainably. You got to find a way to get on the other side and get some downward pressure on rates. A couple of things, and these are things we're doing now, and then I'll talk about looking forward, some big opportunities. So right now we're in a continuous improvement O&M kind of reduction cycle. We've cut about $16 million out in meter reading. We're cutting vegetation management. We've got retirements. We're making a point to be a thorough exemption process for any spots to be refilled to bring down our O&M cost. We're bundling large purchases to make sure we get the lowest per unit price. We are focused on using Missouri vendors wherever possible. About 56% of all our capital investments are going to Missouri contractors and vendors now. But going forward, what are some opportunities? You know, currently we're very tight on capacity, electric generating capacity. As you know, safe, reliable service at just and reasonable rates. We are tight. We're focused on building generation. We have additional requests in the PSC right now, and one they've recently approved for building additional generation. To the degree we can get to a position where we're a little stronger on capacity, we have found with the higher energy market costs that are out there, when we can sell power that we don't need, we're able to flow those profits back to customers, helps bring down rates. But really the big opportunity, the last big demand increase years ago was when all this air conditioning went in, 50s, 60s, and 70s. You saw rapidly increasing demand faster than increases in fixed costs, and see us all downward pressure on rates. And that's sustained for years. Now we haven't had any really demand changes to change that, put downward pressure on rates in decades. And that you can see that in the trend in electric rates we've seen nationally. Now you look at this reshoring of industry, you look at some of the national security opportunities in terms of AI and making sure we're in all the data centers and IT, and I've read all the headlines about AI using less power. Understand we have 15,000 megawatts of new customers that have talked to us about moving to our area. If we got a tenth of them, we still need a lot of new generation. We need it soon. So you have these demand increases. Well then, early 2030s, we're hoping to win these and get them in Missouri. Then you have a lot more units of sale to divide your fixed costs by, put some downward pressure on rates. That would be a welcome change in the trend we've had for years. So good question. Thank you.
Other questions for these witnesses? Senator McCreary.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, trying to think about having a conversation with a senior citizen in my district about this. They're already frustrated about the rate increase that they're going to be facing, somewhere between 10 and 15%. So the media coverage says that many families in St. Louis could pay an additional $17.45 per month. So that's it. For me to be able to say with a straight face, well, the rates for electricity in Missouri are so much lower than other states around us, so like, go team. Like, I don't know how I can like say that to somebody. Like, in a way, I think lower rates in Missouri are good for our folks. Obviously, we have a population, we're stagnant in Missouri, so maybe what if it was more affordable to live in Missouri and people wanted to live here? So I'm just trying to think through like the human part of this. How do I justify expansion of PISA?
Understood. So this is something we talked about with many of the customers in the different public hearings, as you can imagine. And there's, we live and work in these communities. We know there's no good time to adjust electric rates. We know things are tight and people are struggling. And so, in this conversation, we've pointed to a couple of things. The investments are making a huge difference for customers. Where we've made these investments, we're seeing up to 40% improvement in reliability. The investments in this rate review, it represents almost $2 billion of capital investment in Missouri. About half of it improving all the different aspects of the distribution system, transmission system, and about half of it's new energy resources. About 500 megawatts of new renewable energy resources that are serving the customers. So we're meeting so customers tell us they want reliable and affordable power. So we're making sure we hit the reliable thing. We've got to do that as part of our obligation. And then the affordable piece, which comes down to the safe and adequate, reliable service, just and reasonable. What are we doing to make sure our rates are affordable? And one of the ways we calibrate that is looking how are we comparing to national and Midwest averages. And when we then talk to customers who are struggling, then we start to look at, well, what kind of, where customers are struggling, what can we do? And we've, last year it was about $31 million to about 158,000 customers that were struggling. We're now looking at how we go about making sure we expand the eligibility of those programs, talk about how we can bundle programs so it's not so hard to qualify. And then we're working on the federal government level issue where a lot of customers that are struggling, they can't even access LIHEAP, ESIP kind of funding until they have a disconnection notice in their hand. And so many of our programs are dedicated to help them avoid ever getting that notice. And so we've got these conflicting objectives, and we need to make some changes at the LIHEAP, ESIP level as well to try to help those customers who are struggling.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I met with some Ameren executives this summer. I was kind of wearing two hats. I was wearing my consumer advocate hat and my state senator hat. And one of the things I was surprised by is how many families work with Ameren initially to work out a payment plan. But then there's not a way, if something happens in their life and they can't meet the agreed upon payments, they're immediately out of the program. And so they're right back into the problem that they were to begin with. I would love to see a way for Ameren and some of these funds to help our low-income neighbors acknowledge that sometimes what you agreed to a few months ago is not going to work, and that there should be a way to renegotiate, because ultimately, I consider electricity to be like a necessity of life. It's not a luxury anymore. And so that's just an example of like what I was hearing. Maybe less than 20% ever can even make it through the commitment.
Before there's some sort of an issue that kicks in. So let me take that back, because the idea of some sort of a program for if you jump out is our way to get back in.
Right. It's one strike and you're out, is my understanding.
Yeah, we ought to look
and
at
that came from Ameren in their report.
We ought to work on that then.
Okay.
But I haven't answered your fundamental question on PISA.
Sorry, interrupted.
So let me make sure I don't forget that part. So safe, adequate, reliable service, just and reasonable rates. You look at the capital investments necessary to make safe, adequate, reliable service. Absolutely critical, job one. But then you come back to the regulatory compact and say, just and reasonable rates. What's the real cost to put that infrastructure in the ground? And one of the most significant regulatory lag issues in Missouri is what Plant and Service Accounting helps with. Basically, even with, and because of the 85% that's in PISA right now, our ongoing capital investments, we incur about $20 million of losses on those investments. And under the changes in this legislation, we would go up to about $30 million a year with the generation. If you don't do something with the plant and service accounting, we try to add the generation, those losses go up to about $70 million a year. And if we try to build a combined cycle unit or something a little more expensive, it goes to about $120 million a year. And so those are real ongoing significant losses that it just slows your ability to deploy capital and do the things we're trying to win this race to do. And so it comes down to just and reasonable rates and adequate recovery for the capital investments.
Well, and I think that's what this debate is going to be all about, which is, I do think people are willing to pay, but they don't want to pay a penny more than what they have to. And I think that from kind of what I'm hearing is like it's, the details right now that we're trying to figure out. So, and then one last question before I'll turn it back over to the chair. One of the challenges I've had in looking at the impact of PISA since 2018 was because there was that big Trump tax cut return, the money
Yes.
that came back. And do you have any data or anybody have data to show what the impact would have been if you pulled out the money that was returned to the ratepayers because of the tax cut?
I do not, but I can get that, and
Okay.
we can provide it. And it was in that first, so I mentioned since the legislation passed, rates have gone down twice and up twice, and now we're in for a third request. That first rate reduction, part of that was that tax flow-through.
Okay.
And ended up, and of course, all the electric utilities in the comparable studies on the rate impacts had the same thing
Yeah,
happen to
exactly.
them. So it's across the board in the math. It's not an anomaly in Missouri, but we will have that data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Senator Carter.
So I'm looking at section 5 specifically, addressing reliability. Reliable electric generation may be constructed outside the state, and if it's connected to the electric grid of the regional transmission operator of which the electrical corporation is a member. So it's just basically.
I'm sorry, page and line? I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
page 4,
Page 4,
line 108, section 5.
section 5. So, yes, got it.
So I just have a question regarding how this may impact, if we're building generation, electric generation, how will the ratepayers in Missouri benefit? I mean, obviously they're paying for some of that generation. So where will that put the ratepayers in our state in regards to being able to have access to that generation? And how much are they paying for that cost? Does that make sense? Like,
It does. So this is starting in line 108, section 5. It's where we say, such reliable electric generation may be constructed outside of the state if it is connected to the electric grid of the regional transmission operator of which the electric corporation is a member. Well, if you build an electric generation plant in another state, that's questionable if they have the jobs, economic development, investment in the state of Missouri you have associated with a generation plant in the state. I understand the concern. You may have issues with regulatory approvals, siting, access to fuel, water, things like that may end up push it over a state line. And if that happens, then this says that you have you need to be connected to the RTO that serves your service territory. So it's one thing to build in other states, another not to be able to get the power over here. So
Exactly.
you've got to be able to get it into Missouri,
So-
which is the second part of that provision.
So what's the cost disparity across the lines then for those who you're building in another state, but our ratepayers are paying for? I mean, I would just like to know what that looks like.
Well, if you have a generation plant that's being dispatched by, in our area, it'd be the MISO, the Mid-Con Independent System Operator. They actually dispatch all our power plants, okay, and they tell us what's going to operate when. And so this plant in another state, if it's dispatched, they'd say, we need the power from that, turn it on, and then it flows onto the system. And it's not as direct as just it's here to air, and we have to pay for that. We pay for the whole regional transmission system. And so one of the things that comes to that price is we get the power delivered over to us.
So Missouri citizens won't be put on second or third place, basically, even though they've paid to help create that energy production.
Well, the Missourians do end up, I mean, to the degree it's further away, there's higher cost to bring it to Missouri if you locate it some distance away.
Okay, I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Okay, good question.
Further questions from the committee? Senator May.
I just want to go something simple. What is the cost difference, or you have to provide adequate service?
Yes.
We did grid modernization. What is the cost right now in 2025? You know, the median cost for providing that service and recouping that cost. See, when we say the consumer, you know, wants to pay more, or, you know, the profit margins for you as a monopoly, you know, where are we keeping it at? You get what are you following me? I'm trying to say it in a way. What's the difference here? So if my cost is here,
Yes.
you got to recoup that cost from the customer,
Yes.
and you're making a profit. Is that right?
There is excellent question. This also came up.
Absolutely. So I want to know,
What the difference is.
Yeah, where are we
Yeah.
capping, if we're capping it, or if we're at a constant increase?
Right. Good question, and I'll try to break this down pretty straightforwardly. And it's true of any investor in utility, gas, electric, water, everybody. Same structure of financing. You know, generally our capital costs that we put into the system, this $2 billion that I talked about that's currently in front of the Missouri Public Service Commission, about half of that came from banks. It's debt. About half of it came from shareholders. You know, people who we gave them a share and they gave us money, okay?
Yes.
And we took all that capital and then we invested in the system. We have to pay the bank their interest. For shareholders, they call it a return, okay? And so you calculate what that percentage is the bank is just, hey, if you want this loan, this is the percentage, it's like you get a car, okay? Same for us, just we have lower interest rates because they consider us a pretty steady means to pay back. The shareholders, we basically have to compete in a worldwide market to be able to attract sufficient capital investment to make the investments that we are making. And this is the issue of the return on equity, which is probably the most hotly contested issue in any case at the Missouri Public Service Commission. And it is what we consider to be a fair return and what the Office of Public Counsel, the Public Service Commission, the industrials, consumer advocates, everybody has different opinions of what's a sufficient return on equity to attract that capital investment. Ours is currently about 9.5% in terms of a return on equity for that half that is subject to shareholder equity. Okay?
Very good.
So it's about 9.5%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Gregory.
I have a couple. What has led to the, let me start with this. How long have we known that there's going to be the increase in electrical generation need by 2028?
Oh, that's a good question because we've known we needed to move ahead and build additional generation capacity to meet the current anticipated forecast shortfall. We've known that long enough to get ahead and move ahead on the Castle Bluff Energy Center and the three projects that it's a simple cycle gas-fired unit we're moving ahead with construction on. Public Service Commission's approved it now, 800 megawatts, and the projects we just completed. We think we're well suited to serve our customers with reliable power now and in the future. This big additional load that's really, how long have we known that, a year and a half? Yeah, it came on in a big hurry, and it's really got everybody scrambling to find generation resources, you know, simple cycle, natural gas fired, extend the life of existing coal-fired units, look at small modular nuclear. Everything's on the table to try to get capacity, but we've known it a year and a half, and that has not been enough time to actually start getting the approvals, getting the permits, getting the environmental assessments done. We need to be doing all that as quickly as we can.
As I sit back and think about some of this and talk about the rate increases and then just see the closure of the coal-fired plants and the move towards solar and wind, has there been somewhat of a direct correlation to the rate increases with the closure of coal-fired plants and the increase in reliance on renewables?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of good pieces to that. I'll try to hit it a couple different ways. First, the closure of the coal-fired power plants was, other than
And what was the directive of closing those down? I mean, because we know we need to have,
well,
we're a first world country, but yet we talk about rolling blackouts. They deal with it on the West
I lived in
Coast.
California through the blackouts. I'm well aware of what all caused
I don't know
that.
about you, but I walk in my house and it's hot and I want to be cool, and when it's
yeah.
cold, I want to be warm.
As a guy who is an engineer that's designed a lot of different power plants around the world, I'm totally with you. People want reliable power. So the many of these coal-fired power plants that are closing are older than me, which is really old for a coal-fired power plant. And you get to you can make so many upgrades to the plant. At some point in time, you begin to get to where you can't meet the regulations and you can no longer really operate the plant safely, 70, 60, 70, 80 years. You can continue to make upgrades, but you're getting to the point it's really far more expensive to do that than build a new, like a natural gas simple cycle, combined cycle, at some point nuclear. There's other options. So the closure is largely being driven by the plants just being very old. And you can make the upgrades, but at some point in time, it's really not the cost-effective thing for customers. Now, you ask about wind, solar, all of that. There's different people that will like different things I have to say about this, but this is as an engineer that doesn't have a love affair with any particular energy resource. I just want reliable, affordable power. We go through a process every 3 years, and we look at, it's called an integrated resource planning process. It's public. It's on the PSC website. We put a great deal of effort into it. It's looking at all of our demand, all of our expected, retirements, projections in load, all the businesses, everything we can imagine that's going to affect electricity in the next 20 years. And we look at what are the different technologies, what do we think is going to have to retire, changes in fuel, regulatory requirements, all of that. And then we run all these scenarios for what closure and opening of new plants, different fuel sources, anticipated different changes in federal regulations. And then in all these, we look at what's the net present value, what's the net present value to serve customers over that 20-year time frame, or all these hundreds of scenarios. And we come to one that says, this one is the lowest future cost to customers if we do these things. And that will include dispatchable generation, because job one is power 24/7, 365. But it's also going to include wind and solar, because they are low-cost sources of energy when we can't, for instance, the simple cycle gas-fired, a lot of people say, well, that's reliable power. I want you to run that 24/7. I can't get an air permit to do that. Best I can do is a 40% air permit. And worse still, if I ran it all the time, you wouldn't want to pay the bill for it, because the gas is more expensive than the other energy resources. So I have to have dispatchable plants for peak periods, but I've got to have something in between that provides a low-cost energy resource. And wind and solar do that.
And then, I guess last but not least, and kind of maybe Rob for this one, since he's more the economic development guy, and then part of it might be with you. Last year I was talking with EcoDevo and House Budget Committee. They were talking about attracting businesses, and one of the first things was we need large available sites. Number one, acreage type deals. But then the second was energy. Like, what can you provide? Just like you stated earlier, what's the window to get these large companies to commit to Missouri, and what skin in the game would they have? But then secondly, I was reading an article over the weekend when trying to learn about future test year and all the new terminology that I'm experiencing in this committee. Have there been any of these companies come in to be, if I get the term right, in front of the meter and buy direct from you and not necessarily off the grid? Am I getting that phrase correctly? Has that been an ask so far for them to be behind the meter?
Senator, great questions. The first question, if I understand, you're kind of asking when we could expect them to start committing. Is that what you're going to
How
answer?
quick do we need to address this issue? But you talk about companies looking at moving in. They're saying, why not Missouri? We want to go there. When does that window close?
Right.
In your opinion?
So the short answer is the way that you differentiate your state or your community as an attractive location versus Kansas, Illinois, or any other state is that you can provide the quickest route for that business to get to market. And so whether that's making sure that they have available access to workers, to road transportation improvements, or in this case, energy infrastructure, the fastest as you can go is what will differentiate you. So what we're seeing right now across the board is, projected ramp up. We think about when they would come online and operating essentially, say between 2026, 2033, sometime in that time frame. If you can't answer that availability question in that time period, you will be crossed off the list and they will walk away. And that really does get into what the Department of Economic Development was talking about in terms of available sites. We always say dirt is not a site. We've got a lot of real estate in Missouri, but it has to be ready with the infrastructure in the short period of time. And so if you can't answer that, within that rough time frame, you just won't be considered for it. And in terms of your second question, our preference is that we own and operate the infrastructure. We think we can do it more affordably and in a more reliable way. These facilities still need to be hooked up to the broader grid. There's lots of different ways for technology companies, large businesses, et cetera, to generate their own electricity on site. But when you start to get to this scale, they have to put in place technology like an SMR or some really large generation plant that kind of puts it out of reach for most potential users. And even if they do bring their own generation, they still need to be able to hook up to the broader grid because that's what brings reliability if for whatever reason they would go down. So there's lots of interest in kind of an all of the above approach that's out there, but still at the end of the day, if they're going to locate somewhere in our service territory, we think the approach that we're talking about where we provide that safe, reliable, affordable energy is the quickest route to do it.
All right, thank you.
Hello. Senator McCreary, as well as you, brought up the 85%. I wasn't here in 2018, so can you all explain what you're all speaking of on the 85%?
Sure. So when we look at what plant service counties is, basically from when something goes into service to when it gets picked up in a future proceeding at the Public Service Commission reflected in rates, you have cost of capital and depreciation of that asset, and you basically quantify those dollars, and it says that's going to address the regulatory lag that's taking on those infrastructure investments. If you provide 100%, you've largely dealt with that regulatory lag aspect or those losses that those dollars you don't get. The 85% was an effort to say, hey, that's fine. We're going to keep your skin in the game at 15%. And so that was it was put at 0.85, okay? What we're saying now is with the capital investments we're talking about, if we want to go from $20 million a year of losses to $30 million a year of losses, you go to 0.9, because the capital investment, you add the generation to this, it's suddenly a lot more capital investment to build the plants, and we're saying, hey, we understand skin in the game, but let's not make it $50, $60, $70 million. Let's find a way to set it a number that still keeps us in it. 10% is still going to be pushing $30 million a year. So that was the back and forth at that time.
So who is the 10%? Who exactly are you speaking of with the 10%?
10% says that, well, there's that portion of depreciation and cost of capital from when it goes into service to when it gets picked up in a future rate review. That's on us. That doesn't get reflected in rates to customers. So it ends up going against shareholders.
That's all I have for right now.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Senator May?
I just want to follow up on that. So basically, instead of having consumers to cover 100% of the cost, you're covering the 10% of the depreciation.
That depreciation cost of capital piece, yeah, we end up carrying that as I think at the time in the debates, it was to keep us hungry. And that was the idea of keep pushing on cost controls. And so they said, hey, so that's where they put that percentage. In this bill is 10%, which still, at our company size, building generation plants is about $30 million a year of losses that customers then don't see in their rates.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator McCreary.
Thank you. This is for Mr. Dixon. So I'm hearing a lot about the need to build in case companies fully commit to coming here. There's a big difference between companies reaching out to states to see if they've got land or capacity versus committing. I guess, again, back to to our constituents, I'm not sure that folks on fixed incomes should be in this game of building excess capacity for a company that never comes here. So I'm just sharing that. I think if this bill's going to move forward, we're going to have some consumer protections in there. I don't see how we can justify building excess capacity like that would run artificial intelligence or data centers if there's not a commitment from the company to come here. So I'm just putting that out there. I guess probably also sharing that with the chair.
Senator, very much appreciate that perspective. We're not building speculative generation resources on a hunch or on the expectation. As you know, when we submit our preferred resource plan, that's based on our forecast. It's based on what we expect the customer demand to be. And so as you look out into the future, we expect the demand to continue to be in that direction. And so the way that we would approach that is essentially not having that as a speculative thing, but you've got to have policies in place that allow you to quickly build, that allow you to be able to adapt to the market so that when the opportunity does show up, that you're ready to take advantage of it. But we're not doing this on a speculative basis, Senator.
Okay, I guess I misunderstood some of the testimony then. It sounds like this idea that we're going to build it and hope that they come here.
Well, just to add, at the regulatory side, you can imagine a lot of stakeholders share your concern because you go build it and then they don't show up. It's like, so the way that other states are doing it, the same thing we're doing in Missouri is, what are the number of years of commitment that we know they're saying we're going to be here? What sort of are they doing some sort of a minimum bill they're going to be contributing to if we've made this investment to serve them? What are the rates they're going to be served under? And then I'm sure Public Service Commission, Office of Public Counsel, others will have an opinion on what we'll call the tariff. It's really how we go about serving these customers. Because it's not just a straight, as things exist today, these present some real some challenges and opportunities and cost. And so how are we making sure that everybody sees the opportunity for the benefit from these investments? So it's an excellent question. And it's first front of mind of ours. We've been working on these tariffs for months. You'll see all these getting filed at the Public Service Commission in the near future.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Mosley.
So what is the estimated, what is the estimated rate increase for our customers
Oh, in this case?
in the case of if this bill passes?
Oh, well, there isn't one associated with this bill passing. We do have a case in front of the Missouri Public Service Commission right now, and it's one of the larger increases we've had in a while. It's a little over 15%.
So in dollar amount, how much is that?
It represents a change in cost of service since our last case of about $446 million a year.
Okay, but to each customer, what would be that rate increase?
The average customer is about residential customer. It's about $17 a month if it was granted in full.
Any other questions for these witnesses? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you very much. So next we'll take somebody to speak in opposition. We're going to go back and forth as we did on 4 and 5. And when you're ready, proceed, please.
Good morning. My name is Tim Opitz on behalf of the Midwest Energy Consumers Group, a coalition of businesses, manufacturers, and other large customers interested in utility rates and policy. Within SB6, I just want to talk about some concerns about the plant and service accounting provisions. First, just kind of to set the scope and magnitude of the existing law, it's still in place. Companies can still use this for distribution through 2028 and 5 additional years if they can show value to customers. Second, this bill increases that deferral percentage from 85 to 90%. I just want to pause there. I wasn't involved in that prior bill, but my understanding from history being passed down to me is that that percentage isn't to to keep them honest, or however it was phrased, but essentially to offset the retirements for that distribution plant, those lines and poles, that's going on in between a rate case. So kind of a balance about they're investing in new stuff, so the counterpart of there. So that's some of that. I know folks thought that that was too high. Increasing it here, I'm opposed to that. I think, if we look at the cost of it for I'll talk about Ameren, Missouri, recency bias, they were just up here. They have an ongoing case. Their PISA regulatory asset balance is $612 million. I can provide that later. It's in the testimony of Mr. Hipkiss, page 16. Ameren will get a return on and of that money. It's in their rate base that can be considered because of the existing law as is. This is already costing customers a lot of money. Please don't add to that burden with this 5% without a good reason to increase it 5%. Third, this bill adds new generation to qualifying plant. I was talking about gas plants and the need to add capacity. You have heard me say, possibly last year, that we try to pursue balance between our customers and our utilities. When we provide a special mechanism like this accounting mechanism, it throws off that balance most of the time in favor of the utility. Here it would be in favor of the utility for sure. For Ameren, that balance, as I said, is already shifted, distorted by $612 million. And that's just for one utility in our state's distribution system. Now imagine how distorted that balance will be if we add gas generation that we know our utilities are going to add to that balance. Now don't get me wrong, there will be circumstances, as you previewed with your questioning, where that kind of approach may be needed to balance the interest of our customers for reliability and affordability and our utilities' interest in being able to finance and provide this. But once those issues are addressed that are outside of the control of the utility, I think we need to get back to restoring that balance and looking at all relevant factors within a rate case. That kind of gets down to the annual losses that were mentioned earlier about the millions of dollars. Well, those only occur until the point they file a rate case. So it's incumbent on the utilities to file a rate case when they're making a large capital addition in order to have stakeholders and the Public Service Commission, Office of Public Counsel, my own group, look at the costs, the revenues, both sides of the ledger, and see what it really costs to serve customers. I think that's a fair way to do it. And lastly, my experience with Missouri regulatory is that stakeholders have acted to accommodate the utility when it makes or proposes large capital investments. It was mentioned earlier, and I'll just reiterate my point on it. The Castle Bluff Energy Center is a large plant approved by the Public Service Commission, proposed by Ameren. In that case, MECG filed the testimony of a witness. We supported a certain kind of special accounting treatment that is already within the authority of the Public Service Commission. That case was resolved by a stipulation agreement approved by the Commission. So I think that we can work within our existing framework to accommodate the utilities making these large investments when they are needed, and do it in a way that protects customers and keeps our rates lower than the national average, as Ameren just touted and other utilities will tout. In conclusion, I would say there's no need for these accounting changes right now. We can work through the system we've got. And I think we've worked in good faith, and as long as I'm steering the group, I hope to continue to do so. If these terms become law, it's just going to be a windfall for the utilities in Missouri. These resources are in their integrated resource plannings. They've got to build them. And lastly, I would just ask that you as a committee and as senators maintain the balance between our utilities and our customers and not distort it further. With that, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Questions for this witness, Senator May?
Yeah, you mentioned return, and you said Ameren is getting that return. What is it? Do you know what that return is versus cost?
So I was talking in the context of this regulatory balance, which is under the existing law. Mm-hmm. And when the company incurs, and Mr. Wood, I believe, talked about this for Ameren, when they incur a cost on a project that's financed usually by some ratio of debt to equity, their debt is going to be whatever, rate that is that they borrow it at, and their equity is going to be whatever is approved by the Public Service Commission. I don't want to venture to recall what exactly they're asking for in this case. I think in the prior case we were involved, it was in the mid-nines was their return on their equity. And so when that is built into the rates, when we're setting rates, we look at their plant that's been invested. They get an included depreciation expense for that's recovered from customers, plus a return, which is they apply that weighted average cost of capital, which is the ROE times their equity, their cost of debt times their value of their debt, and that's multiplied by their rate base, and that's built into rates. So their existing rates are recovering their cost, plus it's intended to recover their return.
Are you in agreement with the 9.5% or 9% ROE?
That's what it is currently. I think that sounds right of what's been authorized or what was agreed to. I think they're asking for a higher amount in this case, but I don't want to say out of turn what they're asking for.
Because, I listened to, I guess, I don't know how many years I've been doing this, but anyway, I've listened to a lot of this. I understand that we have a monopoly that's providing service for our consumers, and we definitely have to balance the scales when it comes to that company and the consumer. So my question to myself is, what would be, you know what I'm saying, an adequate cost to provide the service to me, but also to recover your cost and, take care of other, the return on equity. What margin do we stay in order to keep costs low for customers and to balance those scales? That's how I look at it. You have all of these little moving pieces that everybody is talking about, but the actual thing is you're providing a service. What cost is it costing you to provide that service? And then, how much return are you looking for, you get me, to provide the service? And are we staying in that, or are we like most companies, they keep trying to increase the return on it? You get what I'm saying? So that's what I'm looking at. So I'm asking you, are you, as in opposition to this bill,
Right.
okay with that? And what specifically are you opposing in the bill, or are you opposing the entire bill?
So specifically within the bill, I'm opposed to these modifications to the plant and service accounting section.
The
The
modifications
others,
to the
we don't
plant
have a position on.
Okay.
Some of them, and I think it was the provisions about the Public Service Commission directly contracting with experts in securitization cases. I can just say, that to me, just from my experience, that makes sense. I've been involved in those securitization cases. They're very complicated. It's a lot of dollars. It makes sense for our regulator to have access to, national experts on that. The others, I don't have comment on, but, we're not opposed to them. In terms of, the ROE, your question on that, that's basically the framework that we have. Is they're going to be able to attract an ROE? Our position in these rate cases is when we typically advocate those, but our position is that the utility asks for more than they actually need to attract capital. In my experience doing this, our utilities, when they need to get capital, they're able to attract that capital. So the returns that they're being authorized are sufficient to do so. Maybe they'll say that, maybe somebody behind me will say that's not sufficient, but I've not seen that in my experience. So I think it's sufficient. I think they're asking for more than is necessary to attract capital, typically in these cases, but I'm not speaking to a particular position in their ongoing case right now.
Okay, thank you.
Senator McCreary.
Thank you for being here. I sometimes have to remind myself that we obviously care about residential, the impact of PISA on our constituents, which I often think of as residential because that's who we're knocking on their doors and talking to them and that kind of thing. But like for a lot of us, well, for me and my other two colleagues here, we're in the St. Louis region, and there's a lot of giant companies that would be impacted by this. So when I hear from senior citizens that live in Creve Coeur that they can't afford the the current rate increase of about $17.50 per month, if the PSC approves it, what kind of scale are we looking at for some of your clients? Like if a residential customer of Ameren is losing it over $17 a month increase potentially, what would an increase look like for a Boeing or for like a lime company that's in the chair's district?
So within the, I don't know Boeing. They're
Yeah.
not a member
And-
of our
and maybe
coalition.
if
I
you
can
have-
speak to.
And I don't want you to reveal
let's say,
anything that's confidential.
Let's say Walmart.
Okay.
They're a big supporter. They're a big employer in the state of Missouri. They're in everybody's
Everywhere.
service territory.
Yeah.
They employ close to 50,000 people in Missouri. I think they're the largest private employer in the state. When there's a case, they're looking at, if they're asking for 15 to 20%, it can be in the millions of dollars that they're facing on an increase. Granted, that's spread across multiple stores. I mean, I've got some larger members that, they might use, at one location, 100 million kilowatt hours a year, which is, but when I started doing this, I was amazed that somebody could use that much power, but compared to coming data centers, it's, it's minuscule. But, theirs could be many millions of dollars that they're facing. And so to the extent that they don't have to pay that full amount, either through, arguing against an ROE or saying, look, we want to work with you, utility, on some of this regulatory lag issues within the current framework, they're happy to do that. I think that in terms of how that impacts this bill, and I don't know what the other consumer advocate groups will say, but I think we're pretty aligned as saying, this will increase rates and it will increase them more than is necessary.
Well, and ultimately, those costs get passed on to the consumer. Like if it's Walmart being hit with an additional couple of million of dollars in electric bills, I mean, it's kind of this cumulative effect, in my opinion. That eventually the customers, like our constituents, are going to pay as residential customers, but then these costs get factored into the cost of goods and services that people are buying.
Senator, you're getting into some of the comments I have prepared for quit bills.
Okay.
That may come, but you're
Sorry.
absolutely right. No. I appreciate any opportunity to talk with senators and any representative. But if our customers or your residential people are even under the guise of maybe reduced rates in the future, if they're required to spend that money on their utility bill now, there's an opportunity cost there that they're foregoing. From a residential customer, maybe they're not able to do any number of things, grocery shopping, whatever it might be. From a business perspective, they have their own capital investments they make. They have their own employees and wages that they take into account, and they, of course, have their own shareholders and profits to worry about. So to the extent that they're required to, at an earlier stage than is cost of service based, if they're required to hand that over to the utility by the state requiring it through this legislation, that takes away control of how they can manage their own business, right? So I do think it's a concern. But, like I said, and I hope I conveyed in my prepared comments, as an industrial group, these larger users recognize the need for reliability, but we also don't want to lose sight of affordability.
Right.
So to the extent we can work with our utilities and work with senators, we're happy to do so.
Very good. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we go to anybody else, I want to remind everybody, we have another committee, excuse me. We have another committee meeting in here at 12 noon, so we're down to about 45 minutes. So we're going to have to try to move along. I want to try to get everybody in here. And just for everybody's edification, we got 45 minutes to another committee. So anybody in support at this point?
Mr. Chairman, I have a handout, if I could, that has a graph that I'd like to.
Okay.
Give it to Michelle.
And proceed when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, committee, my name is Randy Eminger with the Energy Policy Network. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to promote reliable baseload generation throughout the states. Pardon me. I just wanted to point out the map on the front page, which just came out last month in December 2024. This was done by the North American Electric Reliability Council. They did a study of long-term electric reliability throughout the U.S. Basically, you'll note the red part, which is the MISO region. This basically shows the high-risk areas of not having enough power during peak load times in the summer and winter. These are normal peak load times, and as you'll see in the Southwest Power Pool or SPP region of the U.S., it's an elevated risk, which just means basically a shortfall of electricity during extreme weather events such as Winter Storm Uri, which we had in 2001. I wanted to point this study out because it is just a month old, and it does send alarm, as you'll see at the top of the first page. The first quote is by FERC Commissioner Mark Christie, who is now the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And basically, he just says we're retiring plants faster than we're replacing them, and the arithmetic doesn't work. I would point to the second page and just say on the second point that basically when you look at what's happened and the reason this is causing a problem with major reliability risk, if you'll add MISO and SPP together, in those two regions, they've closed over 60 power plants in the last 6 years. 2 nuclear plants, 22 natural gas plants, and 36 coal plants have closed in the last 6 years. 22,000 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 14 million average-size homes. What's even more concerning, listed by the utilities in these two regions, in the next 6 years, they're planning on closing another 34 baseload power plants, an equal amount to 21,000 megawatts of generation, and another 13 million, enough electricity to power another 13 million average households. We see these plants closing at an alarming rate. The very last page shows Missouri, and it shows the power plants that have closed in Missouri in the last 6 years. 3 different power plants, Sibley, Merrimack, and Rush Island. 2 more plants are scheduled to close in 2030. Actually, I think I've recently read where they're pushed the Sioux plant back maybe a couple of years. But there are 2 more base load power plants that are looking at closing in the next 6 years. What concerns us, and I understand power plants get old, but the Rush Island plant that Ameren was discussing was 48 years old when they closed it. We show most coal fuel plants going 60 to 65 years as the average life. There are some plants I know of in Ohio that are well over 70 years, in the 70, 75 years of age. If you keep them well maintained, you can retrofit them with new boilers, new turbines. You can add environmental equipment to these plants, and they can operate a longer amount of time. Basically, I will try to keep it short. Mr. Chairman, I will open it up for questions, but we just support basically not only adding new generation, but we really would like to see everything done to continue to operate the existing generation you have in the state.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody in opposition, please? And proceed when you're ready.
Good morning. My name is John Kaufman. I'm here representing the Consumers Council of Missouri. I am a utility rate expert and attorney, and I have litigate utility rate cases in Missouri and have been allowed to do so in a majority of over 30 states. And so I've seen the way that a variety of states try to balance the interest between the consumer and the utility shareholder, right? And so we have these cases at the Public Service Commission. Let's just take the current Ameren case, for example. Thousands and thousands of pages of testimony, lots of numbers, and litigation that takes up to 11 months to scrutinize what's going on. And the Public Service Commission generally does a fairly good job of finding that number. They probably won't grant Ameren the entire 15% that they want, but it's probably going to be substantial. And as consumer advocates, we realize that they do deserve some rate increase, not 15%, but they do deserve something, and the Public Service Commission is going to find that. My real frustration is when you guys get involved. So the Public Service Commission will balance it, come up with some number between 0 and 15%, and then you guys are going to add to what that. This legislation is extra. This is an extra rate increase that is not needed. They already have an obligation to provide safe and adequate service. As to the natural gas power plants, they've already committed to building them. This is just extra icing on top of the icing they already have on their cake. As to what Ameren rate increases have gone up since PISA was added to the mix, we have, since from 2020 to 2023, rates rose roughly 20%. It wouldn't have been that high had you not passed PISA. Make no mistake, that legislation in 2018 raised rates, took money off the kitchen table of all Missourians, or most Missourians. And there has been an impact to those households as well. One impact is in involuntary utility disconnections. Back before the law was passed, the Ameren was having on a monthly basis, or say on an annual basis, no more than 30,000 disconnections a year. Last year we had 90,000, and that was just through November. So there's been an increase in electric rates that's going up higher than inflation, higher than wage growth, and it is causing increased exponential growth in utility disconnection. And that's 90,000 households, not just individuals. So there is an impact to what you do in this building. And to the extent that energy rates are going up higher than inflation, they're causing inflation generally and causing inflation in every other sector. You just heard from the Walmart representative. That is, as their rates have gone up, that's going to have an impact on the number of employees they can hire and what the cost of eggs and milk and everything else you buy at Walmart. So there are ramifications far beyond even the utility rates themselves. But as to getting down to the nitty-gritty about what exactly the cost is, we do know what the current PISA law does, and that is about a 9.74% increase from 2018 to 2028. So that the Public Service Commission staff analysis, which is this, and I will leave this here. This, and when you see it, you want to look at the back page on subsection C, because that's the version of the law that passed in 2018. It's 9.7% higher than the rates need to be, and that's over a 10-year period, and that is actually higher for residential customers, because the industrial customers, they already got a cap on their rates. There's no cap on the residential rates. And so whatever you pass, if you pass something else this year, it's going to be on top of that. And it also is frustrating to hear that the compromise that was made in 2018 is apparently no longer good. The idea was that it was going to go for 10 years, and as I understood it, 2028, the law was going to expire. We're going to analyze it to see how well it did in grid modernization, but it really wasn't ever necessary to begin with, because they already being granted the privilege of being a monopoly and not having to have competition. In return, you already have the obligation to provide safe and adequate service for everyone. So that is one thing. I would also like to mention, because it's been discussed, the idea of these data centers or high energy tech firms. Just this month, there's been information that suggests that maybe they aren't going to need as much energy as they need. Also, we have at least a half a dozen states that have looked into ways to, you might call it a clawback, or you might call it a take or pay, different ways that you can look at these new customers and make them commit, because they're risky businesses, they don't provide a lot of employment, and they're unlike some of these big, we had the aluminum smelter and some big industry. Some of those customers really, they provide benefits to everyone on the system. The data centers, I'm not so sure. The problem is that they don't provide employment and other benefits, and they also are risky because they go out of business. There could be a change in technology. We ramp up, and everybody's paying more to serve them. And if they're gone, then we have to pick up the cost for whatever power was developed for them. So that is a risky thing, and I think that you really ought to look at fencing around, and maybe the IOUs will be able to join in that discussion, because you don't want to be left holding the bag if they up and leave. I have some additional information on future test year, which I'll also leave with you, and I can answer any questions. But make no mistake, this is a rate increase, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars extra. And our organization is committed to letting the public know who's on their side and who isn't on this stuff, because this is about basic necessities, and just about everybody is concerned.
Questions for the witness, Senator May.
So, what is your concern about the closing of the power plants and the risk of not being able to provide that electricity to customers? Because I know we're protecting customers on this side, but we also have to protect the ability to provide that energy. Because I know when there's a blackout in the building that I'm in, everybody is pissed, everybody is outside, everybody's lighting candles. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So people still want what they want.
We have no problem with the watt-for-watt portion of this legislation. That is the idea that you have to certify about new generation before another is shut down. We are not fans of the securitization law that was passed, in which now adds an unavoidable surcharge on everyone's bill for power plants that are no longer serving them. That's an additional burden for customers. But like I said, the only thing we're opposed to is the PISA, the plant in service accounting part of this bill. That's the one that is a real excessive cost to consumers. And the impact on residential households will be even greater than the general numbers that you see for the cost here, whether it's 5%. If it's 5%, then residential impact will probably be another 7%. And remember, this is going to be on top of whatever the result is of the current ongoing Ameren, Missouri rate case at the PSC.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator McCreary.
So I'm looking at page 13 of the bill. It's a definitions. It's basically, so when we passed PISA in 2018, it said that new natural gas units would not be allowed to be, they wouldn't be considered a qualifying electric plant. So now we're striking that out. So now we're saying this expansion of PISA is now saying that new natural gas units do indeed qualify. Right. But I heard you say that that the companies already have shared their plans with the Public Service Commission that they're already going to build these new natural gas units. So if they've already committed to build them, why do we need to give them a financial incentive to build them if they were already committed to build them?
That's a good question. I mean, it's in their integrated resource planning. One of them is already in a proceeding at the Public Service Commission.
Okay.
For Ameren. Yeah.
So it's not like a company can make an argument with a straight face that they can't build them unless we pass this bill.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, they have an obligation to do it.
Okay,
They have a, you might say, a constitutional obligation to provide.
Thank you.
An obligation that is part of the regulatory compact. They shouldn't have to be bribed to do safe and adequate service. That's part of the deal when you become a monopoly. That's blessed by the state.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I want to remind everybody we're down to 30 minutes that we're going to be able to go. Anybody in support? And proceed as soon as you are ready.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Committee, Kevin will awkwardly be standing next to me, apparently. Jason Clint, the Senior Director of External Affairs, I'm just going to go while he finds his seat. Next to me, of course, is our Vice President of Regulatory Affairs in Missouri, Kevin Gunn, and for the purposes of this hearing, he will be the answerer of tough questions. But I did want to, I'm not going to go over all this again. I'm happy to answer questions. There are a couple things, though, that I want to make sure we clear up. This bill has nothing to do with Ameren's rate case. Okay, so we had a lot of discussion about Ameren. This bill has nothing to do with that rate case. It's also important to note that PISA does not automatically raise rates. Remember how rates are set. You have the depreciation that rolls off, and you have new spending that comes in. That's how you figure it out. So having new costs does not automatically raise rates. What this bill is, it's a very simple bill. It is an accounting measure. What it says is if I invest $1, I can ask for 90 cents back. So for $1 I invest, I can start at 90 cents. The PSC still retains full control to say, nope, that cost is imprudent, you shouldn't do that. So we've taken nothing away from the PSC. All this bill says is you can start at 90 cents of the dollar that you invested, and the rate process continues from there. This is a jobs bill. One of the other things that I have, like Rob Dixon, is economic development. And I see the exact same things that Rob sees, which is if you don't have the power, you're not going to get the jobs. And everybody wants to talk about data centers. I'm not all that excited about data centers. Sorry to those folks in the room who represent them. I'm more excited about the large manufacturers that bring 4,000 jobs. Unfortunately, those projects tend to be about 5 times as large as what we have for a auto manufacturer. So let's just do that because we've talked a lot of megawatts and sometimes it doesn't make sense. So a normal car manufacturer, a large auto plant right now, is about 48 megawatts in terms of that is their annual demand. What we see is a similar manufacturers coming in start at 200 megawatts. So yes, we have the data centers, but we're also seeing this from the large manufacturers that are interested to coming in. So that's why we are in a generation crunch that we are working to get out of. So I also want to point out that this bill will be a part of a package. Next week, you'll hear a bill that will save customers $86 million when you build a power plant. So we need to make sure that we take all of this as whole. So with that, the only thing I would point out, I sent you all, or I think Michelle handed out a packet for everyone, and I would just point out our rates. On the third page there, very proud of Evergy, Kansas and Evergy, Missouri, which have been amongst the lowest rate increases. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm happy to give you the Wells Fargo slide that shows Missouri's in the bottom 5 in terms of rate increases over the last decade. And then I would just point out, the other thing I would just point out is how PISA works. So the slides there at the very end, 8 and 9, kind of maybe sometimes a visual helps me. So if it helps you, I would point out there is a visual to help you understand exactly how PISA might work in this situation. And yes, Senator. And so in the interest of time, I'll stop droning on and see if you all have any questions.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody in opposition? And proceed.
Lisa Panett with Armorvine. We are against this bill. We'll start with the regional transmission operator. Is a regional transmission organization, independent system operator, or equivalent entity approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We've talked about the regs coming down from the feds. And the reality is, in the state, we can do whatever we want. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that we have to follow whatever the feds want to do. And in 2018, we saw that's what happened, is that we went to mandatory requirements such as 25% in solar and wind. That was the legislature that did that. That was not the feds. That was the legislature that did that. And so that's why our rates are going up, and that's why we demolished 2 coal plants, not because we had to, not because we had the energy. It was because the legislature went ahead and decided to do that. With talking about the accreditation power resources, is according to an email by Andy Kolzowski of the Southern Renewable Energy. They showed that they integrated the current accreditation, and it's a solution to provide generation capacity. Who is Andy and who is the NREL that would be doing the accreditation? Andy is part of the Southern Renewable Organization that is wind and solar. NREL is transforming energy through research, development, commercialization, and deployment of renewable energy and energy-efficient technologies. Who is ESIGL and NREL that would be part of that accreditation? Well, they used to be called the Utility for Wind Integration Group that focused on solar and wind. They expanded their position to create a sustainable association. All of this replacement is aimed at the so-called sustainable, and that is what is not dependable. We have 2 coal plants that were not shut down but demolished so they could never go back online again. The legislature did that. And in an article in the Herald Whig, Grainbelt Express transmission line has had its backers and NEMO, and it says that there is $2.2 billion transmission lines project that Cindy O'Laughlin of Leo O'Laughlin could offer its services for. So this is an actual article. She was quoted in there saying it would be an opportunity for us to do some business. We don't have an opportunity that often, particularly one of this size. I think most of the counties would like to do this business in this area and feel the same way. We're all looking to do business. Reliable electric generation may be constructed outside the state. This is because of 2018. So Senator Carter had asked about the outside transmission lines. That's because in the legislation in 2018, it said that we could do that on the backs of Missourians. An accelerated renewable buyer shall be exempt from any renewable energy standard compliance costs as may be established by the utility and approved by the PSC. So on page 6, you are exempting an accelerated renewable buyer from any renewable energy standard compliance. An accelerated renewable buyer is a customer with an aggregate load over 80 average megawatts that enters into a contract. So the normal people of Missouri are the ones that are going to be left on the hook. But these huge data centers, et cetera, that come in, they won't be paying the cost of this. It'll be the citizens of Missouri and the small businesses that will brunt the cost of this. This is a set of a standard, and it is against the people, and PISA is also not a good practice. We saw that with 2018. It's why part of the reason why the energy costs are going up for the normal people, and we would just ask you to vote against this legislation.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody in support? And proceed.
Chairman Cierpiot, and to the members of the committee, I will try to paraphrase some of my comments just for the sake of time, to save time. But my name is Philip James. I'm the Vice President of Wake Transformers USA in Washington, Missouri. And I'm here today. There's been many comments made for the pros and the cons of this legislation from different aspects. The aspect I want to talk about today, though, is a positive impact on a business in Washington, Missouri, and how we're creating jobs and being a great part of our of our community. Wake Transformers USA is based in Washington, Missouri, with our global headquarters are in Brazil. We are a manufacturer, assembler, and installer of power transformers and distribution transformers all across the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. Currently, we employ 574 hard-working Missourians in Washington, and our business is growing significantly. So a little bit about our company. Right now, within our company globally of 40,000 employees, the transmission and distribution division is the fastest growing division in our company, and the fastest growing region of our global company is in North America. We are the only transformer manufacturing location within the United States currently. We work with utilities. We also work with renewable energy developers, and we also work with various industrial customers, oil and gas, mining, all throughout North America in the business that we're in. Locally in Washington, our total payroll is just over $35 million for 2024, and if you put our great benefits on top of that, we're contributing over $50 million locally in pure payroll and benefit costs to our business. As well locally, not counting materials that we buy, just services day to day, whether it's with a printing company or a restaurant, someone like that, we're spending over $5 million locally in Washington, Missouri. Since 2017, WEG has invested over $72 million in our 3 factories in Washington, Missouri. In just a moment, in support of this bill, I'll talk about our growth plans that we have. We're also, too, in terms of giving back to our community for 2 years in a row, WEG Transformers USA is the largest contributor to the Franklin County United Way drive, giving over $400,000 back to our community over the past 2 years. So in 2018, the Missouri General Assembly passed legislation reforming the state's energy policies. Both of these policies, and in both cases, I provided testimony to. WEG was in full support of that, and we want to say again, too, for Senate Bill 6, WEG is in full support of this as well. In terms of previous legislation, what's that done for our business? We've created over 40 jobs specifically from the 2018 and 2022 legislation that's had a direct impact on our business. That first specific bill in 2018, I used verbiage from that bill and a capital investment plan to our company that generated over $25 million of capital investment locally in Washington, Missouri. Now, if we fast forward to today, where we're at, we have an interesting vantage point in our business. As I say, we work with investor-owned utilities, renewable energy developers, and industrial customers all over the United States. 3 of my top customers are in the top 5 renewable energy developers. I work with 6 of the largest investor-owned utilities all across the United States of America. And I can absolutely assure you that having the security, availability, and readiness of power is a huge economic driver inside the United States right now. It's also that way inside the state of Missouri right now. What we're currently evaluating right now at our business in Washington, as I said, we operate 3 factories. Our corporate group has tasked us with how do we increase our output by 50%. And so we're currently working with our local as well as state economic development for an expansion plan that we hope to come forward with in the summer of this year, and how we meet those particular high output tasks that are in front of us. So in many cases, again, states that can offer the availability and reliability of electricity are winning. So I want to thank you for the time today and for the opportunity to speak about the importance of this particular public policy, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that I could.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody in opposition? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Arnie C. A.C. Dienoff, State Public Advocate, and I submitted my form electronically this morning. I'm opposed to SB6, the new provisions relating to electric utilities. It's anti-consumer, anti-Missourian. When it comes to the data center drain, I asked committee members to do some research and look at documents that are on file with the city councils of Reno and Sparks, Nevada, and also the city of Santa Clara, California. These data centers have just overtaken the communities, put a drain on the system, and don't provide much economic development in terms of creation of jobs and spurring the economy in terms of goods. This is bad public policy, like the 2 bills that were heard in committee last Wednesday. This is bypassing promulgated rules and regulations of the Public Service Commission. Ameren wants a 15% rate increase currently on the table with the Public Service Commission that is going through the public hearing process. This bill will, in essence, reeks of billions of dollars of increases on the backs of 6 million Missourians Basically, utilities are saying, the heck with the 6 million Missourians, we want to make profit at any cost. I ask that the committee members defeat this awful Senate Bill 6. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Any of those in support? Please proceed.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rich Albashan. I'm here on behalf of Hunt Midwest today. Hunt Midwest is a developer in Kansas City. We have expertise in developing buildings that have actually been utilized by Google, which they announced last year to put in a data center. It's $1 billion investment. So I also represent Google, and to the fact that we talk about, and while I'm not here today on behalf of Google, I will tell you that they are great investments in our community and absolutely needed for our technological advances that we need every day, which we all rely upon with our phones and everything else that we think that is important in our lives. When we talk about these types of investments, Hunt Midwest is working diligently to bring in new work for the Kansas City region, and we are looking years out to try to find power to be able to bring in companies to Missouri, job-creating companies to Missouri, when repatriating companies come from overseas back to Kansas City, which is an absolutely vibrant area for job growth. And when we see that we can't get enough power for some of these companies coming into Missouri and lose those companies to other states, other regions, where their region power is actually creating enough for them to attract those companies, we see a problem. When we talk about anything that we can do to increase the ability to finance projects to build generation, we are supportive. And we hope that, that we will find a great partner with Evergy in creation of more generation in the future.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Whoa, sorry. We have one question. Okay. That's what I'm going to ask right now. So how many more do we have in here to testify? We're not going to get through them all, but I'm going to ask the ones that we can get to hold your testimony to 2 minutes. And with that, I think we are now in somebody in opposition. And proceed, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Diana Plesha. I represent the Missouri Industrial Energy Consumers. This group has been involved in PSC litigation and legislative work on behalf of large manufacturers for over 45 years. And I've represented that group for 35 years at the PSC as their attorney. It's very important to be brief, but to make it clear that Plan and Service Accounting is rate increase legislation. We opposed it in 2018, and we opposed the renewal of it because there is no need for plant and service accounting. It's a form of accounting that Ameren invented. It wasn't used in other states, and Ameren did try to get that approved in a PSC process. And the PSC rejected it, saying it was a problem. There was no problem that needed to be solved by PISA. PISA has increased rates, and as rates have increased, the risk of renewing PISA is even greater now than it ever was before, because the more utilities spend on infrastructure, the more profit they make. That's just their business model, and there is no doubt that the more they spend, the more returns they have the opportunity to take. If you extend PISA at this point, at a point where the utilities are looking at making massive investments in new generation, they're retiring coal plants early, the burden that you will place on the manufacturing base of this Missouri economy will be material, and it will impact jobs. And we can demonstrate that over time, in every state where you have rate increases, there's a direct correlation to job losses. PISA is not necessary, but it will encourage, with less oversight, utilities to overbuild or overspend. And so we would encourage and ask the committee not to, at this point, approve PISA, but to do some study. There's no hurry. It doesn't have to be done this year. And that would allow time for parties to get before the committee, discuss and provide information. And there's no rush to do this year. And I will take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, anybody in support? 2 minutes if you can, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Grace on behalf of the Missouri Economic Development Council. I'll try to kick off the Me Too testimony for you. Rob Dixon made most of the points I wanted to make. Our economic developers are very concerned about adequate, reliable energy for projects that we're trying to attract to Missouri.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. In opposition, let's keep it to 2 minutes, please.
My name is Dennis Ganal. I'm founder and managing director for MoTax Relief Now. We're in opposition to this bill. It's rare that you have an opportunity to correct your mistakes in life. Well, the legislature made a mistake by passing PISA. You have an opportunity now to turn it back, right, and put it back in the hands of the PSC, who never wanted to lose it and didn't want to grant it. It's costing people money. You know, last we had members out at South County. They weren't even able to get into the building. There was no parking available. So it wasn't just like, well, I was there. No, they couldn't speak. There was just that many people. You know, people in Missouri are under financial stress. And, you know, that's why the governor's saying that we need to look at zero income tax. That's why he's looking at capital gains, removal of capital gains. People are under financial stress in Missouri. We're all for growth, so let's grow. I used to publish newspapers, and I used to be and it was all about making more money, get more money. I get why they're doing it, but it's protected a monopoly. And when I worked at the Coal Research Center when I was a professor, you know, there's plenty of coal resources. It's a cheaper farm, and it's very, very energy efficient, and it can be made clean if they would have updated their facilities. Thank you very much.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you. Anybody in support? 2 minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do it in one. Shannon Cooper, representing the Kansas City Chamber as well as the Greater Kansas City Civic Council. Just want to go on record from the economic development perspective. This is real. In the Kansas City region, we cannot guarantee new manufacturers and businesses that we can provide the energy load they need to develop there. So it's pretty simple. If you want more jobs in Missouri, we've got to do this. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anybody in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair. My name is James Owen. I'm the Executive Director of New Missouri. Wanting to just go on record in discussion about the PISA matter of this and just generally talking about gas as far as economic development and what that means for cost. As far as the economic development that's been discussed here today, I would ask the committee to look at projects and companies like Panasonic in Kansas. I would ask them to look at Nucor in Sedalia. I would ask them to look at Google and with Meta's data centers in the Kansas City area. Those are plants, those are facilities that are seeking, they are being built here, they are built here, and they're being run entirely off of clean energy. They are not wanting gas. They are not looking to have that kind of generation that is going to be powering their facilities. I think that certainly looking at economic development, you should be approaching, if anything, an all of the above approach where you're going to be able to factor in, you know, all sorts of power, solar, wind, battery storage, fossil fuels, if that's what you're trying to accomplish here. Moreover, I just wanted to point out that we do have written testimony about the volatility of gas, how that's going to be challenges for customers, and we will leave that here for your review, and that's all we have.
Thank you for your testimony. Anybody have any questions? Seeing none, thank you. In support, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sam Panettiere on behalf of Burns & McDonnell, an engineering company in Kansas City, and the Northland Regional Chamber of Commerce, representing businesses in Clay and Platte County. I believe it's all been said. We'll just say we're in support and appreciate Senator Cierpiot bringing this bill forward.
Any questions? Thank you. Anybody in opposition, please? 2 minutes or less, please.
Good morning. My name is Gretchen Waddell-Barwick. I'm with the Missouri Sierra Club. I won't touch on the PISA part of this bill, but Sierra Club is in opposition to Senate Bill 6. I'd specifically like to talk about the watt per watt provision in this bill. I'm a mom, and when my daughter was young, we kept a lot of diapers in our house, and we had part of our budget as diapers. But my daughter is 8 years old now, and I don't need to keep diapers in my house. Why would we do the same thing for electric generation in Missouri and codify how much we need in law in perpetuity when we don't know what our needs are going to be in the future? This makes absolutely no sense and is not in the best interests of Missouri consumers.
Questions? Thank you very much. Anybody in support?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Matt Thompson, registered lobbyist here on behalf of Liberty Utilities, expressing our support for Senate Bill 6.
Any questions? Thank you. Anybody in opposition?
Good afternoon, Vice Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Melissa Vatterat. I'm with Missouri Coalition for the Environment. My points have already been made by others, so I'm just here to ask you to vote down this bill.
Any questions? Thank you very much. In support, please.
Thank you.
And they're racing to the mic.
Hello, good morning, afternoon. Mark Dalton, Mid-America Carpenters Regional Council. Just like to go on record in support of the bill. It's a lot of good man hours in construction, and also a lot of the large development we need to bring to the state is going to need the power. So take any questions if you have them.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Anybody in opposition? How many more do I have? Raise your hand, please. We're going to try our best.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jay Hardenbrook. I'm the Advocacy Director for AARP. I think we would probably support most of the provisions in this bill, except for the PISA section specifically. I will tell you our members have big concerns about inflation. That's been brought up before, so I won't touch on that. They have big concerns about the cost of energy. I've been to enough rate cases now to hear people say, we have all of these surcharges that just seem to go on forever and ever and ever, and they never finish the project, they never finish the surcharge. This continues on a surcharge that we opposed to begin with, but it continues on a surcharge by adding in natural gas plants, which really don't belong in here. Natural gas is one of the easiest, fastest plants to bring online. But then also it pushes up inflation for all of our members in the immediate future. So two things that they don't want that are included in this bill, I would suggest that you vote it down.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Those in support, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ray McCarty, President of Associated Industries of Missouri, in support of the reliability provisions in 393.401. We do not have a position on the PISA changes. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Opposition? Okay. Anybody else in support? We're down to support.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jared Hankinson, representing the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, here to testify in support of Senate Bill 6 for the majority of the reasons that have already been mentioned.
Thank you questions, excuse me. Thank you very much. Any more in support?
Amy Blunt on behalf of Meta Platforms. I think you're all familiar with the renewable buyer provision, and if you're not, I'll come and talk to you about it.
Any questions? Thank you. Any others in support? We're out of those in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim Green, registered lobbyist with an organization, St. Louis Electrical Connection, which is a labor management co-op of the IBEW in the National Electrical Contractors Association. We want to go on record in support of this legislation. On a side note, when the data plants were being built in Council Bluffs and in Omaha, Nebraska, it was an unemployment time in our local. We had over 900 electricians from St. Louis working on those jobs, and several of our major contractors were up there doing that work as well. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Anybody else in support?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Truss, a registered lobbyist with the Missouri AFL-CIO, here to go on record in support. And also I'm submitting testimony on behalf of Jeff Abusi with the operators 513 and local union 148.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Anybody else in support?
Mr. Chairman, Scott Ramshaw with the Plumbers and Pipefitters out of St. Louis. I'm the registered lobbyist. We're in support of Senate Bill 6. I've actually, over my 45 years in the trades, I've worked at all of the Ameren facilities, and Infrastructure, energy is very important to this state, and with a lot of things that looking forward to the new ventures that are coming to the state. So with that, thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, sir. Anybody else in support?
Happy birthday.
Support? Okay.
Either way. Rich Germeiner with the Missouri Public Service Commission supported the Chapter 34 exemption for securitization bonds so we can procure necessary staff.
Any questions? Thank you. Anybody else in support? Anybody for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that will conclude the hearing for Commerce. I make a motion that we adjourn. I need a second. Second. All in favor? We're adjourned.